Okay, so let's start the webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. So thank you for your time joining us on this webinar. And for today, or for this afternoon here in Singapore, we will be talking about oil wildlife preparedness and response. And this is taking in the perspectives in Southeast Asia. So this presentation or this paper, actually this is a paper that we have prepared. So this was authored by myself together with my colleague Lih Hern and one of our colleagues as well in Wild Base in Massey University, Dr. Luis Chilvers. And for this afternoon as well, myself and Lih Hern will be talking about this webinar. So again, this is an oil wildlife preparedness and response coming in from the perspectives in Southeast Asia. So quick background, I think what's important to understand in an oil wildlife response and preparedness, two things. Firstly, without human intervention, the effects of oil on wildlife could be fatal. We have seen a number of spills already that happened globally, that the effects of this oil on wildlife was really fatal to the wildlife that was affected. And secondly, definitely there are ethical, legal, and animal welfare grounds wherein the national authorities or those authorities that should take the lead are called to minimize wildlife suffering through setting up appropriate appropriate oil wildlife preparedness and response system. So basically, these are the two things, or the two, I would say, settings that we are looking at when we're talking about oil wildlife and response. This is looking into Southeast Asia. As you know, as you can see from the slide, this shows the map of Southeast Asia. ASEAN, as we call it, we have the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So more, these are the countries. We have Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Philippines, Indonesia, and of course, we also have Timor-Leste. And as you know, Southeast Asia, these are home to busiest ports. And we have the major shipping routes also passing by in Southeast Asia. So we have shipping routes such as Malacca and Singapore, Straits of Malacca and Strait of Singapore. And as you know, Southeast Asia is also home to extensive oil and gas exploration and production. And as we have these shipping routes, busy shipping routes, we have exploration and production. Therefore, there's an increased levels of oil spills. And in fact, Southeast Asia is not really new to major oil spill events. So how did we came about with this paper? Two things that we have done. First and foremost, we did an extensive document review with regards to any publicly accessible reports and databases. And one of the things that we came about, or one of the references that we use, is the Sea Alarm Country Wildlife Response Plans. They have an up-to-date information with regards to each of the countries' oil wildlife preparedness and response policy. And of course, we also looked into some oil spill case studies that would have involved oil wildlife. And aside from the document review, we also did a lot of these interviews with relevant government agency personnel, some oil spill response specialists who were involved in such spills, and of course, some of our industry stakeholders who were quite generous with us in providing sort of information regarding this matter. And as we move forward, I will pass on now to my colleague Lih Hern to talk about the oil wildlife preparedness and response practices in Southeast Asia. Lih Hern?
All right, good morning and afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you come from. So I will continue with the second part of this webinar where we go into details on the study we have done. So the first thing that we will look into is a summary. So we have mentioned this is from the perspective of Southeast Asia, and we have a summary of the status for each country in the Southeast Asian country. You can see we actually have special mention to it two response options within wildlife response. One is the rehabilitation and two is the euthanasia, because these two well, it's given for other countries who are more advanced in terms of wildlife response, but in countries which are not so advanced, or in a region like this where we have religious and cultural consideration, these two approach might need to be tackled more carefully. All right, let's go through the country. So first off, Brunei. Brunei, there isn't an existence of a formal guidelines, but in the national plan, national oil spill contingency plan, they do mention wildlife, and they mention the possibility of rehabilitation as well as euthanasia. And although not specifically written, it may require approval before these two approaches are being used when there's oil spill, when there's oil wildlife in an incident. So next would be Cambodia. So for Cambodia, same, they don't have guidelines for handling oil wildlife, but they do mention possibility of rehabilitation. That means we can capture and rehab the oil wildlife in the event of oil spill incident. But one thing we need to be more careful is that for Cambodia, there might be additional cultural religious consideration in view of the religion in the country. And next would be Indonesia. Indonesia, it's quite unclear at the moment as well. So there's no formal guidelines in terms of Indonesia. We are also need to be careful in terms of the religious consideration, but possibility of rehabilitation is mentioned. Next, Laos. So no policy in place, so we have no information at all. So big cross for all three categories. For Malaysia, so this is possibly the more advanced country in terms of development for wildlife response. So there is actually a formal guidelines just recently adopted, I think in 2020, correct? So in that formal guidelines, they have actually mentioned quite a lot of details in some of the response organization structure of wildlife, how they communicate with the national incident management team. They do also mention all the possible wildlife response approach, and rehabilitation and euthanasia were mentioned. Next would be Myanmar. Again, similar to Laos, no policy in place. We do not have any information. For Philippines, I think we'll talk about that later. So there is a formal guidelines, and rehabilitation, yes, can be done. And for euthanasia, it's still a question. So not enough information. For Singapore, there's no formal guidelines. Same as the other countries. For rehabilitation, yes, it can be done, but euthanasia, there's no mention. But one thing we would like to highlight is that the national plan actually have a heavy focus on protection and cleanup of cleanup plans. There isn't a lot of mention on all wildlife itself, so a lot of focus is on prevention. Second last, which would be Thailand. So Thailand, there's no formal guidelines, some sort of guidelines in existence. We'll talk about that later. And rehabilitation, yes, can be done. Euthanasia, no information. And lastly, it would be Vietnam. We do not have much information on them. So we are aware there's no formal guidelines, but we are not sure about rehabilitation and euthanasia as a response approach. So we will actually zoom into some of the selected countries where we can find a little bit more information. So let's first go to Malaysia. So Malaysia, their wildlife response plan, they call it MORAP, was adopted in 2021. So yeah, was wrong about the date just now. So it was last year. And because it is a new development or a new development in the country, so actually they have an existing national contingency plan, which they have already in line with. So they know what is their current national legislation and state legislation. So the plan is developed with this in mind. And what is more specific in this MORAP is that it covers the protection of sensitive marine habitats. So example, mangrove, coral reef, and seagrass. And another unique practice for Malaysia is that the lead agencies is different. So we understand for Malaysia, they are geographically separated by the Peninsular Malaysia as well as the Borneo. So Borneo is where Sabah and Sarawak is. So Peninsular Malaysia has one lead agency, Sabah has one, and Sarawak has another one. So it's quite a different setup for Malaysia. And in terms of coordination, so this Wildlife Response Committee actually sits a little bit independently of the incident management team. So they have somebody who coordinate between the two communities. So they don't really integrate into the same under the same incident management team. So they have mentioned a quite wide range of approach that can be done. So it ranges from reconnaissance, hazing, rehab, and release. So euthanasia was also mentioned in the plan as well. In terms of in the plan, so they do mention the different facilities that's available to house wildlife for part of the rehab and capture and rehab approach. So this is something good. So they have mentioned a list of facilities as well as the experts and the organization where the experts are housed under. So in terms of future development, so this is something that we spoke to. This is some information that we have received when we spoke to the stakeholders in the Malaysia as part of the desktop interview. So they are planning to actually have a stakeholder workshops somewhere at the end of this year, where they would like to further improve gaps that they have actually identified in their current wildlife response guidelines. So that would be site-specific risk assessment. So they want to know different states, different geographical area, what would be the risk in this area, and then how should they set up their preparedness to handle this kind of different risk profile. And they do have a coastal sensitivities, and they would like to actually include this. So it was the coastal sensitivity index was done by Preparedness. So right now they want to actually include additional layer of information, which is the wildlife sensitivities. So that allow them to actually understand their risk and also allow them to formulate their response strategy better in case of any incident. And something unique for Malaysia as well is that because they have different agencies, and different agencies actually have jurisdiction over certain specific species. So they actually, after obtaining the coastal wildlife sensitivities, so they will know what kind of species that were identified before. Then they can based on the result, they can then identify the responsible agencies for those species that wasn't identified before. Next, we will go into Philippines. So for Philippines, the lead agency for wildlife response is Biodiversity Management Bureau, BMB, under the Department of Natural Resources and Environment. And their wildlife plan actually is in existence, but it's not available to public. So the information was mainly received through conversation and conversation with the authorities. So their plan is actually currently under revision, and they have mentioned availability of trained personnel such as veterinarians for the capture and rehabilitation of wildlife. But what we have also see is that they do not identify any facilities, which is what Malaysia has done. So this is something that they do not have right now. So they have a lack of equipment and facility. The next country we would like to zoom in is Thailand. So Thailand, the department responsible would be the Natural Park, Wildlife and Plant Conservation Department. So they are actually mentioned in their national plan, and their role is actually to provide advice on wildlife resources and also to participate in development or restoration plan for those affected areas when there's oil spill. And they do not have again, we mentioned they do not have formal guidelines or a separate wildlife response plan, but in their oil spill environment recovery plan, which was published in 1998, they did have a small part on it that provide guidance. Just to provide more information, just recently we have a meeting with the Gulf of Thailand countries, and they have a update in their regulations, and their regulation require them to actually to revise and update their the plan. So we might have more information once they have published that, but right now it's being updated. So let's go back to the oil spill environment recovery plan. So it actually provide a decision tree. So we look at the decision tree, how it is. So it prioritizes the different species for wildlife protection, and there is a short paragraph, short guidance on each of the wildlife species. How can they respond, and also guidance on how to conduct monitoring and assessment. Let's look into the decision tree. So if you look at the figures on the right, so this is a sample of the decision tree on how they could prioritize different wildlife if, let's say, oil has impacted an area. And I have mentioned they also provided guidance in terms of how they can respond to different species. So the different species that they have mentioned or they have available for guidance is the dugong, cetaceans and sea turtles, turtle nesting sites, seabirds, wetland birds, and marine national parks. So they have actually special mention on this, the following sensitive resources. The next country that we have information is Singapore. So the agencies involved would be both the National Parks Board and Maritime Port Authority of Singapore, so NParks and MPA. So they work closely in terms of oil spill response, and the main steps in oil wildlife response would be prediction, protection, and cleanup. So we can see actually they have a lot of focus in the plan. A lot of focus is on preventing the oil wildlife to happen. But in terms of responding to oil wildlife incident or treating the oil wildlife itself, the guidance is not as detailed or is not as comprehensive as other countries. So the protection, in terms of protection, so they have the protection booming plan for environmental resources that have been identified at risk. So this is in terms of protection. And for shorelines that have been impacted by oil spill, they also have cleanup plans for shoreline. But the cleanup plans that do not actually details if let's say there is oil wildlife on the shoreline, what kind of approach they should use. So these are the in-depth study we have in terms of the different countries. So next is what we like to share in terms of desktop review and interview with some of the stakeholders. So for Singapore, I think we have two examples, Singapore and Malaysia. So for Singapore, the major spills we have looked through the history, so that has the oil wildlife impact, of course. There's only one documented oil wildlife event, which is the Ivory spill in 1997, which happened in the Singapore port limit. So this was actually quite a famous spill on its own because of the size of the spill. So in that spill itself, there actually has a incident of oil wildlife. So what happened is that they found oil-coated birds. So and also 5 oil-state kingfisher that have been washed ashore. So these are the carcass of the wildlife, but they did not mention whether the kingfisher was the cause of the death was being oiled, or it was oiled after they washed ashore. So there wasn't any document evidence. What happened was that during the incident, what was the approach? So the prioritization was on shoreline cleanup. So they did that to minimize the potential oiling of the migratory shorebirds. So again, there wasn't any much in terms of actual handling of oil wildlife itself. Next is the experience that they had with Malaysia. So we had an interview with the industry stakeholders, and the oil wildlife events are rarely documented. Just recently, they actually had a small spill in Port Dickson in 2020, and it affected multiple states, and it also had documentation of oil wildlife. So what kind of oil wildlife that was observed was mainly mud lobster, crab, fish, and sea snail. And there was also one oil shorebird observed as well. So what did they do is they perform the normal shoreline cleanup to prevent further oiling of birds. They actually did rehabilitation of oil wildlife. So I think I saw some photos of them relocating the sea snails and mud lobster that they caught. So they put in the box and they try to relocate them into somewhere to prevent them from getting oil. So because this was the first documented oil wildlife event, and they were also trying to develop the National Oil Wildlife Plan. So they have some lesson learned that they would like to actually share and possibly to update their National Oil Wildlife Plan. So as I mentioned earlier, the spill actually affected multiple states, and handling of oil wildlife or jurisdictional control in Malaysia is that each state actually have control in terms of handling of wildlife. So spill that cross multiple states actually led to increased bureaucracy. I think I do recall they mentioned about crossing specific line on the water, then they actually need to go back and then disembark and embark from another location. And there were also multiple species involved. So I mentioned earlier for Malaysia, their plan is that for different species there is different lead agencies or the different identified agencies that would lead to that will be dealing with them. So in this incident, they had multiple species, so they have different agencies involved. So this actually led to more coordination required. So they should have some kind of mechanism that allow smooth coordination between different agencies. And lastly, of course, they do not have sufficient identified wildlife experts. So there might be some of the species that do not exactly know how do they deal with that. So from our desktop studies, from interviews, from our research on public, so the summary of our findings are as follow. So they are really important because that would actually give rise to our recommendation later on. So first, in general, we actually realized, or we found out that in terms of information, there is very limited information. And in terms of report, there is also limited report of wildlife documentations. So that could be due to lack of regulation. So there's no plan or there's no regulation in terms of wildlife management. Second would be there's lack of awareness on issues in terms of wildlife management. So people are not aware that actually wildlife is something they need to record, they need to respond to, and they need to provide the proper documentation. So there's no such awareness, so there's no information. And lastly, would be the indication is actually the welfare of wildlife is actually not a priority during preparedness and response. So we can actually have this kind of indication from the summary I found earlier. There's a lot of countries that don't have an established wildlife response guidelines, and there are not no specific mentions on the approach, whether it's possible and it can be done. And in terms of response, we can see in Singapore the priorities is about cleaning up the shorelines. But let's say if you have find out you have discovered any wildlife, what should you do? So these are three main findings we have concluded from our study. So the next I would like to pass on. The last one, of course. So we can also, there's no information, of course, we also cannot rule out the possibility there is no wildlife impact in the oil spill incident before. So this could be one of the reasons as well. So I will pass on to Norman to mention our recommendations based on our findings.
Okay, thanks, Lih Hern. So as you all can see, based on what Lih Hern talked about earlier, you can see the spectrum of where Southeast Asian countries stood with regards to all wildlife plans or preparedness. You have at one end, you have Malaysia, wherein they are seen to be very prepared with regards to all wildlife. And you have other countries like laggards like Laos or Myanmar, who doesn't have any policies in place, and you have everything in between. You have Philippines who has some plans, but it's not publicly available, and you have Thailand who has developed something back in the 1990s. And they are keeping updating it, but really it's not sort of formalized to be a separate all wildlife response plan. So I would say that in terms of maturity, our region here in Southeast Asia may not be as, I would say, mature with regards to the other regions of the globe, like perhaps Australia, New Zealand, or perhaps like Europe. So with that kind of context, with that kind of background, here are the things that we would like to communicate across with regards to our recommendations with regards to developing oil wildlife preparedness in our region. So first and foremost, what's really important is to engage key stakeholders in the formal planning process to define what should be the objectives, what are the risk strategies, and implement these preparedness strategies on oil wildlife over time. This is not something that could be done easily. It takes a lot of engagement events. It would take a lot of effort really to make sure that this implementation, these investments in equipment and training will be assured to be implemented in different countries. And as we mentioned, different countries in the region would have their different pace with regards to moving forward in making sure that this would be implemented. And of course, we are shout out to the good practice. All of this defined good practice on oil wildlife coming from the IPICA Good Practice Guide. So although, as we have mentioned earlier, some of the Southeast Asian countries, or most of them, would have the established national contingency plan. What's important is that integrate those elements of their national contingency plan, the primary, secondary, tertiary response strategy, into the existing incident management structure, and of course, further incorporate the wildlife response procedure. So it is not uncommon to see a national contingency plan wherein it would provide you details with regards to response strategies such as dispersants, booms and skimmers, in situ burning, but it would, most of the time, these national contingency plans would lack details, or would lack information, would lack guidance with regards to wildlife response. So it is highly recommended to sort of integrate the wildlife response procedures into the existing national contingency plan. Incorporate not only the procedures but the trained personnel into oil spill response operations by having a good linkage between the national contingency plan and the wildlife response plan. Basically, what we are saying here is that oil wildlife response planning, or oil wildlife response itself, this should not work in silo away from the other response strategy. So all of this should work together to maximize or optimize the results when addressing an oil spill. Some of the countries in Southeast Asia, it would be highly recommended for them to be a party in relevant international conventions, more specifically on those conventions that could support the development of their own national law supporting issues on oil wildlife management. So there would be a number of international conventions with regards to protecting the wildlife, protecting the sensitive resources. So by being party to this, that would open a way for them to develop their own national laws to effect these international conventions, thereby increasing the awareness on oil wildlife management. And the last bit of recommendation that we have with regards to oil wildlife preparedness and response. So we would like the countries, not only this recommendation not limited to Southeast Asia, but consider opportunities for regional collaboration on preparedness efforts, and of course, on developing the wildlife response capability in exercises or in actual spills, utilizing local and international experts on such efforts. So really also having a regional collaboration also works because we could be learning from each other, and from those learnings we could further establish some of the procedures that's already have in that country, or further develop some of the policies that they have. Right, so that's the perspective with regards to the oil wildlife response and preparedness in Southeast Asia. But I would also like to talk about a quick one with regards to a remote training that OSRL is offering. This is called the Remote Oil Wildlife Response Training for Decision Makers. So basically, this training is looking into the perspective of oil wildlife, but looking it through the lens of incident management. So it is not about capturing or training about how to capture or how to clean up the animal, but really it talks about how would we view oil wildlife response from the incident management perspective or incident management lens. So basically, this course or this training, this is a collaboration between oil spill response and the wild base of Massey University. So what we would like to get out of this training is to integrate the wildlife planning and response strategies to wider spill response. As we have mentioned earlier, there's like a disconnect between the usual response options that we have, like dispersants, containment, and recovery from the oil wildlife response. So what we would like to do is look at it from the perspective that this wildlife response could be integrated together with the other response strategies. So the wildlife response is not isolated, but again, this is an integral part of oil spill response. So we are creating this training, and this is customized for incident commanders, the section chief, technical specialists like the environment unit lead, and wildlife specialist. More specifically, if you have a role on the wildlife branch management or a wildlife strike team, then definitely this course is for you. Quick one on the programs. So these are the programs that or the content that you will find in that course. So you would see that there will be specific modules that the OSRL has developed, and there will be specific modules that the wild base of Massey University has developed. And also there would be a combined effort on this module. So just as a quick promotion of this sort of training. And again, this is in line of how we are advocating, the development really of oil wildlife response awareness and preparedness in the region. So we have come to the end of the presentation, but we still have some time. We would appreciate if you have some questions with regards to this webinar.
There was one question. Is the oil and gas industry invited to participate in the stakeholder workshops?
Invited by stakeholder. Yes, yes, definitely. It would be great to have the oil and gas industry if you have those stakeholder workshops, because what we could say right now is that the experts on this matter would be the industry. So definitely being part of the workshops together with the government, that would provide more perspective in these kinds of event. Lih Hern, anything you want to add?
I think the comment is that it is specific to Malaysia. I think the stakeholder workshop that they intended to organize end of this year. So actually the lead organizer is Petronas. So they actually represent both the industry as well as the regulators. So I would say they should invite the I'm not sure of their invitation list, but they should invite both the industry as well as the government regulators.
All right.
And stakeholder workshops that they plan to have.
Okay, right. So question from Shine. So Sean asked, is the course scheduled or on demand? Also, what is the duration? So the duration of the course is for 2 days. It's a remote training. It is a published course currently. This schedule is from November 9 to 10. But if you have enough people in your organization, we could arrange a customized course for you. Okay, hope those answers the question, right? Okay, thanks, Sean. I see Jeffrey typing, so let's wait for them to finish to type their questions. What will be the course fee? The course fee is based on being a member and a non-member. We would direct you. So actually, I will be sending you. I can send you the link later on with regards to the course fee. I cannot recall it it's not on the top of my head how much. Darren, would you have an idea?
0.050 for
members, right? So I think the course fee for members, it's $1,050 US dollars. but no idea. I forgot how much it is for the non-member, but definitely I would be in touch with you later to share with you information with regards to the course, content, and of course the fee regarding this remote training. Okay, Jeffrey asked, what is your view in the context of Malaysia or Borneo? What is your view in the context of Malaysia, Borneo, where in the event of oil spill, there will be possibilities it involve different state and across the region? How the coordination looks like? Clear?
Between Sabah, Brunei,
And Sarawak.
Sarawak. All right, so actually that is a difficult question because I don't think they address this in their current plan.
Mm.
The lesson learned you have meant, if you can recall, for the spill in Port Dickson, so it was between the state of Malacca and Singapore. So they had difficulty in terms of the cross-state coordination because they mentioned cross this line on the water, there was the bureaucracy involved. So they would actually want to explore how can this be overcome when they have such similar incidents. So I would think this problem would be the same if they replicate it in Brunei, in Sabah, Sarawak, because of the cross-state coordination. So short answer is right now no answer. Because
but in terms of Sarawak, Sabah with Borneo, with Brunei, I think that one clearly that's a different story already.
Yeah, if involve a cross country coordination, then that would be on a higher level where it's not the wildlife management team, but it would be the incident management team with the Brunei government.
Yeah, because it's going to be two different countries already. So depending on the cooperation between these two countries, the approach would be following whatever the agreements on those regional or those country-to-country agreements are.
So based on my understanding, it would be the wildlife response team reporting to the national incident management team. Malaysia, they call it forgot the name. And in Brunei is NOSCO.
Yeah.
Malaysia, there's a name for the committee. I think it's called management committee. So this will be these two committee, then they will talk to each other in terms of cross-boundary coordination.
Right. Okay, thanks, Leon. So hope that answers your question, Jeffrey. And you can see from the chat, Emma has also shared the link to the oil wildlife response, remote oil wildlife response course that we are talking about. So this should answer the question of BJ Engineering. So hope that is, please do check that site. Okay, so any more questions from our audience? Again, I think what we could take away from this is, again, Southeast Asia, very diverse set of countries. As it's not like Europe, wherein you have common understanding with regards to certain topics or issue. Each country has its own, in Southeast Asia, has its own pacing on how would they develop this, and definitely would have different views on how would they tackle this, more specifically on the oil wildlife response options that they have. Again, because the diversity of Southeast Asia, some of the things, like for example, euthanasia, I would say it's a sensitive topic because of the diversity in the cultural background, religious background, and other sort of background if you look into the whole of Southeast Asia. So we're really a diverse set of countries that we may have different views on different issues or different topics. And of course, we talked about it's a full spectrum here in Southeast Asia. One end, you got Malaysia, who's leading the countries in terms of the oil wildlife plan, and then you have the lagging countries wherein they don't have a policy right now. So, and everything in between. You got Philippines, you got Thailand, you got Singapore, who also have their own way, set of thought processes looking into this oil wildlife response and preparedness. Right. I think no more questions. Those are good questions, really. If no more questions, thank you for your time. If you do have further questions, please do not hesitate to send us a note. I am Norman Lorica Ramos from Oilsphere Response, and of course, my colleague, Mr. Lih Hern Yow. You could reach us to us. You could reach to us if you have further questions with regards to oiled wildlife. So thank you all for your time and have a good day, and hope to see you in person soon, and keep yourself safe. So bye.